The cemetery was quiet that morning, just like it had been every Thursday for the past 8 months. Elena walked slowly along the stone path, clutching a small bunch of yellow sunflowers. The weight in her chest hadn't gotten any lighter since the day they'd lowered her son's casket into the ground. She knew the way by heart now, past the old oak tree, right at the angel statue, and then 15 steps to the polished granite headstone that read, Miguel Morales, 2007-2024, beloved son who lit up every room. Elena set down her bag and carefully arranged the flowers in the built-in vase. She brushed away some fallen leaves and traced her fingers over Miguel's name, carved deep into the cold stone. "Good morning, sweetheart," she whispered, the way she always did. "Mom's here." In the months since the accident, these one-sided conversations had become her lifeline. She'd tell Miguel about her week, about the dog next door that wouldn't stop, barking about how his bedroom remained untouched. Sometimes she'd bring his favorite snacks and sit there eating them, telling him how the new movie he'd been waiting for had finally come out. Today, though, Elena noticed something that made her pause. Next to where she'd placed her sunflowers was a small, smooth stone painted with tiny stars. She hadn't put it there, and it wasn't something she recognized from her last visit 3 days ago. She picked it up, turning it over in her palm. Someone else had been here. Someone else remembered her son. "Mrs. Morales?" Elena looked up to see Luis, the cemetery groundskeeper, standing a respectful distance away with his rake in hand. "I didn't mean to startle you," he said, his weathered face kind. "Just wanted to check if you needed anything." Elena showed him the painted stone. "Do you know who left this?" Luis shook his head. "I see different people stopping by this spot sometimes, but I don't interfere. Grief is private." After he moved on to continue his work, Elena sat on the small bench she'd had installed beside the grave. She pulled out the lunch she'd packed, 2 sandwiches out of habit, though she'd only eat one. The other she'd leave wrapped up on the corner of the headstone, a tradition she couldn't bring herself to break. Elena had been the kind of mother who knew everything about her son, or at least, she thought she had. Miguel had been her only child, born when she was just 20. They'd grown up together in many ways. He told her about school troubles, friend drama, his dream of becoming a doctor. Their small 2-bedroom apartment had always been filled with his laughter, his music, his endless questions about how the world worked. But now, staring at the painted stone, she wondered about the parts of his life she hadn't seen. The people who knew him in ways she didn't. Miguel was popular in school, she said to the man who stopped to visit his wife's grave nearby. She hadn't meant to speak aloud, but lately she found herself talking to strangers more, especially here where everyone understood loss. The man nodded sympathetically. "My Lucy's been gone 5 years now. Sometimes I still find little gifts at her stone. Her old students mostly." "That's beautiful," Elena said, looking back at Miguel's grave. Besides the painted stone, she noticed now that the area around his headstone was unusually tidy, as if someone had been carefully maintaining it beyond the regular groundskeeping. On her drive home, Elena couldn't stop thinking about those small signs of visitors. Who were they? What had Miguel meant to them? What stories might they have about her son that she'd never heard? Her sister Daniela was waiting at the apartment when she got back. Having let herself in with the spare key, the smell of fresh coffee filled the small kitchen. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Daniela said, pushing a mug toward her. Elena set her bag down and sank into a chair. "Not a ghost, just signs." She told Daniela about the painted stone, about the neatness of the gravesite. Someone's been visiting him, maybe several someones. Daniela wrapped her hands around her own coffee mug. "That's good, isn't it? That he's remembered?" "Yes, but..." Elena stared out the window at the busy street below. "I want to know who. I want to know what parts of Miguel they knew that maybe I didn't." They sat in silence for a while, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the apartment. On the wall hung photos of Miguel, as a toothless first grader, holding up a science fair ribbon in middle school, beaming in his high school soccer uniform. "You know," Daniela said slowly, Carlos installed one of those small cameras at his cabin after someone kept stealing his fishing gear. They're weatherproof, run on batteries. Really small. Elena turned to look at her sister. A camera? At the cemetery? Is that weird? Daniela asked, then shrugged. Maybe it is, but if you're curious. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Miguel's friends who had come to the funeral but gradually stopped calling as life moved on. She thought about his teachers who had sent beautiful cards describing a thoughtful, bright student. She thought about the hundreds of photos on his phone that she still couldn't bring herself to scroll through. Who else carried pieces of her son's memory? The idea of the camera kept coming back to her. Was it disrespectful, invasive, or was it simply a mother's need to hold on to any connection to her child? 3 days later, Elena found herself at a small electronics store, listening as a young clerk explained how the small battery-operated camera worked. It's motion-activated, so it only records when someone's there, he explained. The memory card can hold about 48 hours of footage. And it's waterproof? Elena asked, not wanting to explain why that mattered. Completely weatherproof, the clerk assured her. People use them for wildlife watching all the time. That evening, Elena sat at her kitchen table, turning the small, black device over in her hands. It was barely bigger than a deck of cards. The instruction manual lay open beside her, but her mind was elsewhere. Miguel had been driving home from a study session when the accident happened. A rainy night, a sharp curve, a momentary distraction. The police had been kind, telling her he wouldn't have suffered. His phone had been found with an unfinished text. On my way, Mom. Don't forget to. She never knew what she wasn't supposed to forget. One of the many conversations cut short by his sudden absence. The next morning dawned gray and misty. Elena arrived at the cemetery earlier than usual, the camera tucked in her jacket pocket. She felt nervous, like she was doing something forbidden, though the cemetery had no rules against leaving such items. Luis was trimming hedges near the entrance. When he saw her, he raised a hand in greeting. Luis, Elena called, making a split-second decision. Could I ask you something? She showed him the camera, explaining her idea in halting words ready for judgment or refusal. But the old groundskeeper's eyes softened instead. 10 years ago I lost my daughter, he said quietly. I would have given anything to know who remembered her after I went home each day. With Luis's help, Elena positioned the small camera discreetly, near a cluster of decorative stones angled toward Miguel's grave, but not capturing other nearby resting places. It was almost invisible unless someone was looking for it. I just want to know, she explained, feeling tears rising. I just want to see who else misses him. Luis patted her shoulder. Grief makes us do strange things, Mrs. Morales. But I don't think this is strange at all. For the next 3 days, Elena found it hard to concentrate on anything. She worked her shifts at the hospital billing office mechanically, went through the motions of everyday life, and tried not to think about the small black eye watching over, her son's final resting place. On the 4th day, she returned to the cemetery with a racing heart. The camera was untouched, still hidden among the decorative stones. With shaking hands, she retrieved it, replaced the memory card with a fresh one, and hurried home. In her living room, Elena connected the memory card to her laptop as the instruction manual had explained. A folder appeared, filled with short video clips, each triggered by motion at the grave. She hesitated, her finger hovering over the keyboard. Was she ready for this? What if there was nothing to see? What if her son's memory lived only in her heart now, or worse? What if she saw something that would change how she remembered him? Be brave, she whispered to herself, words she used to tell Miguel before his soccer games and big tests. Elena clicked on the first file and held her breath as the video began to play. Elena's finger trembled as she clicked through the first few video clips. Most showed nothing but leaves blowing across the cemetery grounds or shadows shifting as clouds passed overhead. She felt a mixture of disappointment and relief. Then she opened the 7th file. A young woman appeared on the screen, walking slowly toward Miguel's grave. She looked to be about Miguel's age, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Elena didn't recognize her from school or from the funeral. The girl carried a single yellow flower, a daffodil, which she carefully placed in the vase, next to Elena's sunflowers. Then the girl did something unexpected. She sat down cross-legged in front of the headstone and started talking. The camera had no microphone, so Elena couldn't hear what was being said, but she could see the girl's face clearly, sometimes smiling, sometimes serious, occasionally wiping away tears. After about 15 minutes, the girl stood up, touched the top of the headstone gently, and walked away. Elena sat back, her mind racing. Who was this girl? What connection did she have to Miguel? She checked the timestamp on the video, Tuesday afternoon, when Elena had been at work. She clicked through more files, most showing nothing of interest, until she found another visitor late Wednesday evening. An older woman, perhaps in her 70s, who spent several minutes tidying around the grave, removing dead leaves and straightening the flowers. She left behind one of those painted stones, similar to what Elena had found before. The last significant clip showed a man in blue medical scrubs visiting very early Thursday morning, just after sunrise. He stood quietly at the grave for only a few minutes, head bowed, before checking his watch and hurrying away. Elena closed her laptop and moved to the window, staring out at the street below without really seeing it. Her mind was full of questions. These people, strangers to her, had known her son. They carried their own memories of him, their own reasons to mourn. She pulled out her phone and called Daniela. "It worked," she said when her sister answered. "There are people visiting him, people I don't know." "What are you going to do?" Daniela asked after Elena described what she'd seen. Elena hadn't thought that far ahead. "I don't know. Should I try to meet them? Would that be strange?" "Maybe not," Daniela said thoughtfully. "Maybe they'd want to meet you too. Share memories." After hanging up, Elena opened Miguel's bedroom door. She'd kept it mostly untouched. His soccer trophies still lined the shelf, physics textbooks stacked on the desk, college brochures for pre-med programs fanned out on the bulletin board. She sat on his bed and tried to think. Miguel had always been outgoing, quick to make friends and offer help. But he'd also been private in some ways, especially in his last year of high school. He'd spent more time volunteering at the hospital and less time bringing friends home. Elena had assumed it was part of growing up, part of preparing for his future medical career. Now she wondered what else she might have missed. She opened his desk drawer and pulled out his high school yearbook. Flipping through the pages, she looked at the faces of his classmates, searching for the girl with the ponytail. She wasn't there. Neither was the elderly woman, nor the man in scrubs. The next morning, Elena called in sick to work. She had never done this before. She was always responsible, always dependable, but today felt different. Today she needed answers. She arrived at the cemetery earlier than usual, bringing a thermos of coffee and a book she wouldn't read. She chose a bench with a clear view of Miguel's grave, but far enough away not to be immediately noticeable. Then, she waited. The morning passed slowly. A few people came to visit other graves, but no one approached Miguel's. Elena drank her coffee and tried to focus on the birds singing in the trees overhead, the peaceful quiet of the place. Around noon, Luis passed by with his wheelbarrow. "Mrs. Morales," he greeted her, stopping. "You're here early today." Elena hesitated, then decided to be honest. "I saw the videos from the camera. There are people who visit him. I thought maybe—" Luis nodded understandingly. "You might meet them." He glanced at his watch. "The young lady usually comes on Tuesdays and Fridays, around 4. The older woman is less regular. You've noticed them too?" "I notice everything here," Luis said simply. "It's my job to watch over them all." Elena felt a rush of gratitude for this quiet man who had been paying attention when she wasn't there. "Thank you, Luis." He smiled and continued on his way, leaving Elena to her vigil. At 3:45, Elena moved to a different bench, one partially hidden by a large magnolia tree but still with a view of Miguel's grave. She felt nervous, like she was preparing for a blind date or a job interview. At 4:05, the girl with the ponytail appeared, right on schedule. Elena watched as she followed the same routine from the video, placing a yellow flower, sitting down to talk. From this distance, Elena could see the girl's lips moving but couldn't make out any words. After about 10 minutes, she gathered her courage and stood up. Her heart pounded as she approached Miguel's grave. The girl looked up, startled, then quickly got to her feet. "I'm sorry," she said immediately. "I can go if you want privacy." "No, please don't," Elena said quickly. "I'm Elena Morales, Miguel's mother." Recognition flickered across the girl's face. "I'm Rosa," she said quietly. "I knew Miguel." An awkward silence fell between them. Elena hadn't planned what to say beyond this point. "The yellow flowers," she finally said. "They were his favorite color." Rosa nodded, looking down at the daffodil she'd brought. "He told me that once. Yellow like the sun," he said. "How did you know my son?" Elena asked, the question she'd been holding back. Rosa bit her lip, seeming to consider her answer carefully. "We met at the hospital. I was a patient, he was volunteering." Elena nodded, encouraging her to continue. "I was going through a really hard time," Rosa said, her voice softening. "I felt alone, like nobody would care if I just disappeared." She glanced up at Elena, then back at the ground. Miguel was the volunteer who brought around books to the teen ward, but he didn't just drop them off. He'd sit and talk. Really listen. Elena felt a lump forming in her throat. This was the Miguel she knew, the boy who never passed by someone in need without stopping. "He told me about wanting to be a doctor," Rosa continued, "about how he wanted to help people who felt broken. He said everyone deserves a chance to see another sunrise." Her voice cracked slightly. "I was only supposed to be in the hospital for 3 days. I ended up staying 2 weeks. He visited every day he volunteered." "I didn't know," Elena whispered. "He never mentioned patient confidentiality," Rosa said with a small smile. "He took that seriously, even as a volunteer, said it was good. Practice for when he became Dr. Morales." Elena felt tears welling up. "And you've been visiting him since the funeral," Rosa confirmed. "I saw you there, but I didn't want to intrude. Miguel helped me find my way back when I was lost. The least I can do is say thank you, even if he can't hear me anymore." Elena reached out and took Rosa's hand. "He would be so proud of you, for still being here." Rosa squeezed her hand back. "Sometimes I tell him about my day, about school. Sometimes I ask what he would do in my situation. It might sound weird, but it helps." "It doesn't sound weird at all," Elena said. "I do the same thing." They stood together in silence for a moment, united in their memories of the boy they had, both loved in different ways. "Would you like to get coffee sometime?" Elena asked suddenly. "I'd love to hear more about the times you spent with Miguel." Rosa's face brightened. "I'd like that very much, Mrs. Morales." They exchanged phone numbers, and Rosa explained she needed to catch her bus. As she turned to leave, she paused. "There are others, you know. People whose lives Miguel touched. I'll remember him." After Rosa left, Elena stayed by the grave, processing everything she'd learned. Her son, her beautiful, compassionate son, had been changing lives in ways she hadn't even known about. She gently touched the headstone, tracing his name with her fingertips. "You never told me," she whispered. "About Rosa, about the others. You were doing such important things, and I never knew." The wind rustled through the trees above, sending a shower of leaves spiraling down around her. One yellow leaf landed directly on top of the headstone, as if placed there deliberately. Elena smiled through her tears. Perhaps there were no coincidences, only signs for those willing to see them. And she was definitely looking now. She took out her phone and called Daniela again. "I met one of them," she said when her sister answered. "Her name is Rosa." "And?" Daniela prompted. Elena looked back at Miguel's grave, at the yellow flowers catching the late afternoon sunlight. "And this is just the beginning," she said. Elena couldn't sleep that night. Her mind kept replaying her conversation with Rosa, wondering about the other visitors she had seen in the camera footage. The elderly woman who left painted stones, the man in scrubs who visited at dawn. She woke early the next morning, made coffee, and sat at her kitchen table with Miguel's photo album. She turned the pages slowly, looking at his growth from a gap-toothed child to a confident teenager. Had there been signs of his secret acts of kindness that she'd missed? Little clues about the lives he was touching beyond their home? Her phone buzzed with a text from Daniela. "How are you feeling today? Want company?" Elena replied, "I'm okay. Actually going back to the cemetery." The camera showed someone visits early mornings. Daniela's response came quickly. "Be careful. Call me after." Elena arrived at the cemetery just as the sky was beginning to lighten. The morning air was cool, and dew sparkled on the grass. She parked her car and walked the familiar path. But instead of going directly to Miguel's grave, she found a bench partially hidden by a large oak tree. From there, she had a clear view but wouldn't be immediately noticeable. The cemetery was peaceful at this hour. Birds were just beginning their morning songs, and the world had that in-between feeling. No longer night, not quite day. Elena checked her watch. According to the camera footage, the man in scrubs had visited around 6:15 a.m. It was now 5:55. As the minutes ticked by, she felt increasingly foolish. What if he didn't come today? What if he was just passing through that one time? What would she say if he did appear? At 6:10, movement caught her eye. A man in blue scrubs was walking briskly along the path, his posture suggesting someone with limited time. He looked to be in his 40s, with salt and pepper hair and glasses. Elena recognized him from the camera footage. He stopped at Miguel's grave, stood quietly for a moment, then placed something small on top of the headstone. From her position, Elena couldn't see what it was. The man stayed for only a minute or two, head bowed, before checking his watch and turning to leave. Elena stood up quickly. "Excuse me," she called, walking toward him. The man turned, startled. As she got closer, she could see the ID badge clipped to his scrubs. Dr. Thomas Hernandez, Cardiology. "I'm sorry to bother you," Elena said, suddenly unsure what to say next. "I'm Elena Morales, Miguel's mother." Recognition and something like guilt flashed across the doctor's face. "Mrs. Morales," he said quietly, "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you," Elena replied automatically. Then she gestured toward the grave. "I've noticed someone's been visiting." "The camera." She stopped, realizing how that might sound. I was curious about who might be remembering Miguel." Dr. Hernandez looked uncomfortable. "I hope you don't mind. I feel I owe him a debt I can never repay." Elena frowned slightly. "A debt? Did you know my son?" The doctor shook his head. "Not in life, no. But I know what he did, what he gave." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Mrs. Morales, did the hospital discuss organ donation with you after Miguel's accident?" Elena felt a jolt of surprise. After Miguel was declared brain dead, a kind-faced coordinator had gently asked about donation. In her shock and grief, Elena had said yes, thinking it was what Miguel would have wanted. He was always helping others. This would be his final act of kindness. "Yes," she said slowly. "They told me his heart, lungs, and kidneys were donated, that they helped several people." Dr. Hernandez nodded. "My wife, Ana, received his heart." Elena felt her knees weaken. The doctor quickly moved to support her elbow, guiding her to the bench she had just left. "I'm sorry," he said, sitting beside her. "I probably shouldn't have told you. There are rules about donor families and recipients meeting." "No," Elena said, finding her voice. "I'm glad you told me. I never knew who received his organs. They said the information was confidential." "It is," Dr. Hernandez confirmed. "Ana doesn't even know I come here. But I'm a cardiologist. I know hearts, and every day I listen to my wife's heartbeat, your son's heart, and I feel grateful beyond words." Elena couldn't speak for a moment. Somewhere in the world, Miguel's heart was still beating, still giving life. "How is she?" she finally asked. "Your wife?" A smile transformed the doctor's serious face. "She's doing wonderfully. She had been on the transplant list for 3 years. Dilated cardiomyopathy. Her heart was failing, and time was running out. Then we got the call." His voice softened. "Your son's heart was a perfect match." "Miguel wanted to be a doctor," Elena said, tears filling her eyes. "He was going to apply to pre-med programs." "I know," Dr. Hernandez said quietly. "The transplant coordinator told us a little about him. Not his name, of course, but that he was young, healthy, with dreams of medicine." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. "This is what I leave sometimes." It was a tiny metal heart, the kind found on charm bracelets. "Anna is an artist," he explained. "Before her illness, she made jewelry. Now she's starting, again. She made this not knowing the significance." Elena reached out and Dr. Hernandez placed the small heart in her palm. "Such a tiny thing to represent such an enormous gift. Would you like to meet her?" The doctor asked suddenly. "Anna, I mean, it's not typically done, but I could arrange it if you wanted to." Elena closed her fingers around the metal heart. Did she want to meet the woman who carried a piece of Miguel inside her? The thought was both comforting and terrifying. "I think I would," she said softly. "Not right away, but yes." Dr. Hernandez nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Whenever you're ready, here's my card." He handed her a business card with his hospital contact information. "I should get to my shift now, but please call any time." As he stood to leave, Elena remembered something. "Dr. Hernandez, there's an elderly woman who visits too, and a young girl named Rosa. Do you know them?" He shook his head. "I've never seen anyone else here, but I'm not surprised Miguel touched other lives too." After the doctor left, Elena sat for a long time, holding the small metal heart and watching the morning light grow stronger across the cemetery grounds. Her son was gone, yet parts of him lived on, not just physically in those who received his organs, but in the memories and lives of people he had touched. When she finally stood, she placed the metal heart carefully on the headstone, next to a smooth stone painted with tiny stars that hadn't been there the day before. The elderly woman must have visited again. Elena decided to return that evening, hoping to meet this mysterious woman who left such beautiful tokens. But first, she had another stop to make. An hour later, she stood outside the hospital where Miguel had volunteered, the same hospital where Dr. Hernandez worked, where Rosa had been a patient. She hadn't been here since the awful night of the accident, when she'd received the news that had shattered her world. Taking a deep breath, she walked through the sliding doors into the busy lobby. At the information desk, a volunteer in a blue vest looked up with a smile. "Can I help you?" "I hope so," Elena said. "My son used to volunteer here, in the teen ward, bringing books to patients. His name was Miguel Morales. I was wondering if anyone might remember him." The volunteer's smile faded to a look of sympathy. "Oh, Miguel, yes, we all remember him. He was one of our best. Let me call Nancy from Volunteer Services. She coordinated his program." While she waited, Elena looked around the hospital lobby. Miguel had walked these halls, worn one of those blue vests, carried books and comfort to people in need. She'd dropped him off and picked him up hundreds of times, but she'd never really seen this place through his eyes. 10 minutes later, a woman with curly gray hair approached her. "Mrs. Morales? I'm Nancy Way, volunteer coordinator. Would you like to come to my office? I have something I think you'd want to see." Elena followed Nancy through the hospital corridors to a small office lined with filing cabinets and bulletin boards covered with photos and thank you cards. "We were all heartbroken about Miguel," Nancy said, searching through a drawer. "Such a special young man. The patients loved him, especially in the teen ward." She pulled out a folder labeled Morales M. "After he passed, we received so many cards and letters from patients he'd helped. I saved them thinking someday you might want them." She handed the folder to Elena. "Take your time. You can read them here or take them home. Elena opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were at least 20 cards and letters, many decorated with colorful drawings. She read the first one, written in careful handwriting. Dear volunteer, office, I heard about Miguel's accident. He used to visit me when I was getting chemo last year. He never made me feel sick or different. He just treated me like a normal kid. I'm better now, but I won't forget him. Please tell his family he made a difference. Elena looked up at Nancy, tears streaming down her face. I had no idea. Nancy squeezed her shoulder gently. That's just who he was, quietly changing lives, one person at a time. As Elena continued reading through the cards and letters, she felt something inside her begin to shift. The crushing weight of grief was still there, but alongside it now grew something new, a sense of wonder at who her son had truly been, and pride in the legacy he had left behind. Elena carried the folder of letters home, reading each one multiple times. Children from the pediatric ward, teenagers from the cancer unit, even a few nurses and staff members who had worked with Miguel during his volunteer hours. Each letter revealed a different facet of her son: his patience with a frustrated child learning to walk again after an accident, his quiet company with a teenager too sick to talk but grateful not to be alone, his reliable presence bringing books and conversation to those who needed both. By evening, she had made a decision. She would go back to the cemetery and wait for the elderly woman who left the painted stones. Then she would reach out to Dr. Hernandez about meeting his wife, Ana. One by one, she would connect with the people who kept Miguel's memory alive in different ways. The sky was turning golden when Elena arrived at the cemetery. Luis was just finishing his shift, loading tools into a small utility cart. Back again, Mrs. Morales, he asked with a gentle smile. You're visiting more often these days. I'm looking for someone, Elena explained. The older woman who leaves painted stones. Have you seen her today? Luis nodded. Mrs. Chen usually comes around sunset, says it's a peaceful time. Mrs. Chen, Elena repeated, the name new to her. Do you know how she knew Miguel? That's not my story to tell, Luis said kindly. But she's been coming since just after the funeral, very faithful, always brings those little painted stones. Elena thanked him and made her way to Miguel's grave. The small metal heart that Dr. Hernandez had left that morning was still there, catching the evening light. She sat on the bench and waited, watching as the cemetery took on the golden glow of sunset. About 20 minutes later, an elderly Asian woman with silver hair appeared on the path. She walked slowly but purposefully, her back straight despite her age. In one hand, she carried a small cloth bag. Elena's heart quickened. This must be Mrs. Chen. The woman approached Miguel's grave, seeming not to notice Elena on the bench nearby. From her bag, she took out a painted stone, this one decorated with tiny blue and purple flowers. She placed it carefully next to the metal heart, then stepped back and bowed her head slightly. Elena stood and walked over. Excuse me, she said softly, not wanting to startle the older woman. Mrs. Chen turned, her eyes widening slightly in recognition. You are his mother, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Elena replied. I'm Elena Morales. Lin Chen, the woman said, extending her hand. Her grip was surprisingly firm. I have seen you here, but never wanted to intrude on a mother's grief. Your painted stones, Elena said. They're beautiful. I've been finding them for months, but I never knew who left them. Mrs. Chen smiled. In my culture, stones can be a connection between this world and the next. Each one I paint with something meaningful. How did you know my son? Elena asked, the question that had brought her here. Mrs. Chen gestured to the bench. Shall we sit? My old knees are not what they used to be. Once seated, Mrs. Chen turned slightly to face Elena. I met Miguel at the senior center on Oak Street. I teach a weekly art class there, painting mostly. One day, this young man appears in the doorway asking if he can watch. He says he's doing a school project on active aging or some such thing. Elena smiled. That sounded like Miguel, curious about everything. He doesn't just watch, Mrs. Chen continued. Soon he is helping Mrs. Rodriguez, who can't hold her brush steady because of her arthritis. The next week he comes back. No more talk of school projects. He just helps, cleans brushes, mixes colors, talks to the lonely ones who have no visitors. Reached into her bag and pulled out a small sketchbook. After a few months, he tells me he wants to learn to paint properly. Says doctors should have hobbies outside medicine to keep them human. She handed the sketchbook to Elena. These are his. With trembling hands, Elena opened the book. Inside were simple but heartfelt watercolors. The view from the senior center windows, a bowl of fruit, an attempt at Luis's face as he worked in the cemetery. On the final pages were several stones, painted with stars, flowers, and tiny, intricate patterns. He made these? Elena whispered, running her fingers over the painted stones on the page. Mrs. Chen nodded. He was just learning. Not very good yet. She smiled, but very determined. I told him the story of memorial stones in my homeland, how they carry messages to those we have lost. The next week he brought stones he had collected, asking me to teach him how to paint them properly. Elena looked up at Mrs. Chen, tears in her eyes. I never knew he was learning to paint. He never mentioned the art classes. Young men, Mrs. Chen said with a small shrug. They don't tell their mothers everything. Too busy becoming themselves? She pointed to the sketchbook. You keep that. And this too. She reached into her bag once more and pulled out a stone larger than the others. On it was painted a beautiful yellow sunflower, remarkably detailed. For such a small canvas, he made this one, Mrs. Chen said. His last project. He was going to give it to you for Mother's Day. I found it among his supplies when I packed them up after. Her voice trailed off, but she didn't need to finish. Elena took the stone, cradling it in her palm. A gift Miguel had intended for her, now finally finding its way home. Thank you, she whispered. For keeping this, for remembering him. How could I forget? Mrs. Chen said simply. 20 years teaching art at that center and never had a student like him. Not the most talented, perhaps, but the most present. He saw people others looked past. They sat in comfortable silence as the sunset painted the cemetery in shades of pink and gold. After a while, Mrs. Chen spoke again. I have always come alone, but if you would like company sometimes, I would like that very much, Elena said warmly. As they exchanged phone numbers, Elena felt another piece of the puzzle that was her son's life fall into place. The volunteer at the hospital, the friend to a struggling girl, the art student at a senior center, and now, the organ donor whose heart beat in another's chest. When she got home that evening, Elena cleared off the dining table and spread out everything she had gathered. The folder of letters from the hospital, Miguel's sketchbook, the painted stones, the small metal heart, physical reminders of the lives he had touched. She reached for her phone and dialed Dr. Hernandez's number. Mrs. Morales, he answered, sounding surprised. Is everything all right? Yes, Elena said. I've been thinking about your offer, about meeting your wife, Anna. I think I'm ready. There was a pause on the line. Are you sure? There's no rush. I'm sure, Elena said firmly. I've spent today meeting people who knew Miguel in ways I never did. I think it's time to meet someone who carries a part of him with her. They arranged to meet that weekend at a quiet cafe not far from the hospital. After hanging up, Elena went to Miguel's bedroom and sat on his bed, looking around at the remnants of his life. The soccer trophies, the science books, the college brochures. You were so much more than I knew, she whispered to the empty room. So many lives you touched that I'm only now discovering. Her phone buzzed with a text from Rosa. Thought of Miguel today when a volunteer brought books to my friend in the hospital, still following his example. Coffee next week? Elena, smiled as she texted back, yes, and I have stories to share. She returned to the dining table and looked again at the collection of memories she had gathered. An idea began to form in her mind. Miguel had connected all these different people through his kindness. Perhaps it was time for them to connect. with each other. She opened her laptop and created a new document titled Miguel's Memorial. Not a funeral this time, heavy with fresh grief, but a celebration of the life he had lived and the legacy he had left behind. She began to make a list. Rosa from the teen ward doctor, Hernandez and Anna Mrs. Chen from the senior center, Nancy from volunteer services, the patients who had written letters. One by one she would invite them all. They would share stories, connect the pieces of Miguel's life that had been separate until now. Together they would create a fuller picture of the boy she had raised and the young man he had become. Outside, the night had fallen completely. Elena stood and went to the window, looking up at the stars scattered across the dark sky. For the first time since the accident, she felt something like peace stealing into her heart. Miguel was gone, but his story wasn't over. It continued in the lives he had touched, in the heart beating in Anna's chest, in the painted stones and shared memories. And she, his mother, was now the keeper of these stories, the one who would weave them together into the full, beautiful tapestry of her son's too short but meaningful life. "I see you now," she whispered to the stars, "all of you, and I'm so proud." The cafe was quieter than Elena had expected for a Saturday morning. She had arrived 15 minutes early, too nervous to sit at home waiting. She chose a table by the window, where the morning light streamed in, warming the small space. She had dressed carefully for this meeting, not formally, but with intention. She wore the blue scarf Miguel had given her for her birthday last year. "It matches your eyes, Mom," he had said, wrapping it around her neck with a flourish. The bell above the door jingled, and Elena looked up. Dr. Hernandez entered, holding the door open for a woman behind him. Elena's heart skipped a beat as Ana Hernandez stepped into the cafe. She was perhaps in her early 40s, with warm brown eyes and dark hair cut in a stylish bob. She moved with the careful deliberation of someone who had been very ill but was regaining strength. When she saw Elena, a mix of emotions crossed her face: nervousness, gratitude, and something like recognition, though they had never met. Dr. Hernandez guided his wife to the table. "Mrs. Morales, this is my wife Ana. Ana, this is Elena Morales. Please, call me Elena," she said, standing to greet them. There was a moment of uncertainty. Should they shake hands? Hug? How did one greet the woman who carried your son's heart? Ana solved the dilemma by gently taking Elena's hands in hers. "Thank you for agreeing to meet us," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I've thought about you every day since Thomas told me who you were." The three of them sat, ordered coffee, and fell into an awkward silence. There was too much to say, and no easy way to begin. Finally, Elena reached into her bag and pulled out a photo of Miguel. Not a formal portrait, but a candid shot of him laughing, his head thrown back, joy radiating from his face. "This is my son," she said simply, placing the photo on the table. "Miguel." Ana looked at the photo for a long moment, her eyes filling with tears. Instinctively, her hand moved to her chest, resting over her heart, Miguel's heart. "He has your smile," she said softly. "He had his father's laugh," Elena replied, memories washing over her. Loud, uninhibited, you could hear it from across the house. Dr. Hernandez, Thomas, covered his wife's other hand with his. "We can never thank you enough for your decision that day. We know what it cost you." Elena nodded, unable to speak for a moment. The day she had said yes to donation had been the worst of her life. Making any decision at all had seemed impossible in the fog of grief. "I've been meeting people who knew Miguel," she said when she found her voice again. "People whose lives he touched. I never realized how many there were until recently." "Would you tell us about him?" Ana asked. "I'd like to know whose heart I carry." So Elena told them. About Miguel as a little boy, always curious, always kind. About his dream of becoming a doctor, his volunteer work at the hospital. About Rosa, who he had helped through a dark time. About Mrs. Chen and the art classes at the senior center. "He painted stones," Elena said, opening her palm to reveal the small sunflower stone she now carried everywhere. This was meant to be my Mother's Day gift. Anna's eyes widened. Stones? I paint stones too. I've done it for years. It's a mindfulness practice my therapist suggested. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small stone painted with a delicate hummingbird. I always carry one with me. The coincidence, if it was a coincidence, hung in the air between them. The doctors told us that organ recipients sometimes develop new tastes, new interests after transplant, Thomas said quietly. They call it cellular memory. Most of the medical community doesn't believe it's real, but... When did you start painting stones? Elena asked Anna. About 7 months ago, Anna replied. After the transplant, during recovery, I felt drawn to it somehow. It brought me peace. 7 months ago, just after receiving Miguel's heart. Elena looked at Anna with wonder. Could such a thing be possible? Could Miguel's passion somehow live on, not just in memory but in the very cells of his donated heart? I'm organizing a memorial, Elena said, suddenly. Not like the funeral. That was all grief and shock. This will be a celebration of Miguel's life. All the people who knew different sides of him coming together. Would you come? Both of you? Anna glanced at her husband, then back to Elena. Are you sure? We don't want to intrude on your grief. You're not intruders, Elena said firmly. You're part of his story now. An important part. By the time they said goodbye 2 hours later, it felt less like a first meeting and more like a reunion. They had shared stories, tears, and even laughter. Elena had shown them photos of Miguel on her phone. Anna had described her art studio where she now spent hours painting, something she had never done before the transplant. As they parted, Anna hugged Elena tightly. Thank you, she whispered. Not just for today, but for raising such a wonderful son. I promise to take good care of his heart. Elena watched them walk away, Thomas's arm protectively around his wife's shoulders. She felt drained, but also strangely fulfilled. Another connection made, another piece of Miguel's legacy honored. Over the next 2 weeks, Elena threw herself into planning the memorial gathering. She spoke with Luis about using a small gazebo in the cemetery for the event. She called Rosa, Mrs. Chen, and Nancy from volunteer services. She went through the letters from patients and reached out to those who had included contact information. The responses overwhelmed her. Everyone wanted to come. Everyone had a story to share. On the day of the memorial, Elena arrived early to set up. She brought photos of Miguel, his sketchbook, and some of his childhood mementos. Luis had helped her arrange chairs in a circle under the gazebo and had brought fresh flowers. He would have liked this, Luis said, looking around at the peaceful setting. Much better than tears and black clothes. People began to arrive. First Mrs. Chen with some of the seniors from her art class, then Rosa with her parents. Nancy came with 3 volunteers who had worked alongside Miguel. A teenage boy on crutches arrived with his mother. Elena recognized his name from one of the letters. Then Thomas and Anna, carrying a small canvas covered with a cloth. Soon the chairs were full and people stood in small groups, introducing themselves, discovering their connections to each other through Miguel. Elena cleared her throat, and the conversations quieted. Thank you all for coming, she began. 8 months ago, I lost my son. I thought I knew everything about him, his dreams, his plans, the kind of person he was. But recently I discovered there was so much more to Miguel than I ever realized. She looked around at the gathered faces. Each of you knew a different side of him. Together, we can create a fuller picture of the life he lived and the legacy he left behind. One by one, people stood and shared their stories. Rosa talked about Miguel's visits during her darkest days, how he had helped her find hope again. Mrs. Chen described his determination to learn painting, his patience with the elderly artists in her class. The boy on crutches spoke about how Miguel had helped him laugh again during physical therapy after a bad sports injury. Nancy shared how Miguel had created a special book cart with selections specifically chosen for long-term patients. A nurse, described how he would sit with frightened children before procedures, distracting them with silly jokes and stories. When it was Thomas and Anna's turn, there was a hushed silence. Everyone knew who they were, what connected them to Miguel. "I never met Miguel in life," Anna said, her voice steady though her eyes were moist. "But because of his gift, because of your courage, Elena, I am alive today." She unveiled the small canvas she had brought. It was a painting of a heart, not anatomically correct but abstract, done in vibrant yellows and golds. At its center was a perfect, detailed sunflower. "I painted this for you," she said, handing it to Elena. "I've never painted sunflowers before, but lately I can't seem to stop. They just feel right." Elena accepted the painting, too moved to speak. The sunflower had been Miguel's favorite. He had never told Anna that. He couldn't have. Yet somehow she knew. As the gathering continued, Elena watched the connections forming between these people who had never known each other before. Rosa and the boy on crutches exchanged phone numbers. Mrs. Chen offered to teach Anna more advanced stone painting techniques. Two former patients discovered they had been in the hospital at the same time, with Miguel visiting them both. Luis approached, offering Elena a cup of water. "This was a good idea," he said, looking around at the animated conversations. "Bringing them all together." "It feels like Miguel brought us together," Elena replied. "Even now." Later, as the sun began to set and people slowly departed, Elena walked to Miguel's grave. She wasn't alone. Rosa, Mrs. Chen, Thomas, and Anna walked with her. Together, they placed their offerings: fresh yellow flowers, painted stones, the small metal heart, and Anna's sunflower painting, which they propped against the headstone. "I put a camera here once," Elena told them, touching the granite surface gently. "I wanted to see who remembered him. I never imagined I'd find all of you. And we found each other," Anna said softly. They stood together as the golden light of sunset washed over the cemetery. Different ages, different backgrounds, strangers until recently, now connected by the threads of one young life that had touched them all. Elena looked at the faces around her, at the sunflower painting glowing. In the evening light, at the stone in her hand painted by her son months ago, the camera had revealed something she never expected. Not just visitors to a grave, but a living legacy that continued to grow and connect people to each other. Miguel was gone, but his story wasn't over. It lived on in Rosa's renewed hope, in Mrs. Chen's art classes, in the heart beating in Anna's chest, and in Elena herself. A mother who had discovered that love doesn't end with death. It just finds new ways to continue.